recording now. Take that there and move this down. Wow. I can't find my PowerPoint, but let me go here.
Isn't technology wonderful?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Let's not. Okay. All right. I don't have things on the screen that I want, but I can. It's all here, more or less. There. Okay. Are we back to where we started?
Yeah.
So I was saying that Isabel Wilkerson's style, or it's really kind of a new genre, other authors are picking this up as well, is called narrative history, where she combines, her reporter style. She was a reporter for the New York Times and the Chicago Bureau here for many years. So that's her basic method, ethnography. But she combines that with kind of a sociological and political and historical kinds of analysis as well. And the result is, I think, very compelling and often kind of persuasive retelling of history in a way that I think gives us a broader understanding. So,
Pastor, let me say one thing. As a historian, I am generally not fond of narrative history because most of it is done very, very badly. I'm just thinking of a good author who writes terrible narrative history is Colin Whitehead. But Wilkerson is the best I have ever seen in that genre. She really has the ability to tell the story and to stay close to the facts, and I just think it's a remarkable book.
Well, Warmth of Other Suns, I believe she spent the better part of 15 years writing, and that was published in 2010. She's been working on Caste for the better part of 10 years. So yeah, she's a very careful interviewer and collecting these collecting stories and facts. This is titled ECRA's Circle of Solidarity and Anti-Racism. I realized that I talked about this with a bunch of pastors and leaders of faith communities in Edgewater last week. And so I forgot to change the title, but that's what that is. One of the things that Wilkerson starts the book off with, really a whole kind of set of metaphors, but this is the very first thing that she points out, is this sort of famous picture from 1939 in a, get to my notes here. It's a shipyard in Nazi Germany. I'm still not in the right spot with my notes. I guess I should have sat down before, 2 minutes to 3. But these are all people saluting to Hitler. But there's one man in the picture that's standing on the right side of history who refuses to salute. And you can see him there in the circled in the photograph. and it just highlighting how difficult it is to stand against the tide when everyone around you is doing something different. You know, there's this conversation now about the big lie due to the national election, presidential election, the lie told about the outcome of the election and who won and whether it was stolen. And I think probably a lot of the people that in Edgewater feel like they're not taken in at all by that kind of that big lie. But caste and racism turns out, if Wilkerson is her thesis is correct, it's one of those big lies told about humans and the human race that is still operative today, and in which we've all participated in one way or another. And maybe we can become like the man in this picture who could stand apart from the tide. She, another metaphor at the beginning of the book that she'll return to is that that America is like an old house. And anybody who's lived in an old house knows that you need to attend to what's beneath the surface. Because if you don't, and you just choose to ignore what's there, it only gets worse. The work is never done. It needs constant sort of maintenance. She will argue that the caste system in the U.S. is like the bones of the house. It is the supporting structures, whereas the walls and the exterior, that's like that's the covering of race. Race is like the skin of over the bones of a house, and that we've inherited this old house and live in it and benefit from it in many different ways, but we don't always know very well what is there from previous generations, and it's important that we learn. What is a caste system? One a senator before the Civil War, Charles Sumner, famously said, "Caste makes distinctions where God has made none." Very basically, a caste system is a fiction. It's a big lie, if you will. Makes distinctions between human beings that are arbitrary and artificial. A little bit lengthier definition is here on a caste system is an artificial construction, a fixed and embedded way of ranking human value that sets the presumed supremacy of one group against the presumed inferiority of another group on the basis of ancestry and often immutable traits. So on the basis of a caste system, we arbitrarily decide who's attractive and who's not, who's smart and who's not, who's fit to lead and who is fit to shovel coal. Deeply embedded in US history, beginning with the genocide of the Native Americans, but then also labor that's brought from Africa. This system becomes part of the bones and skin, the fabric of our country. Richard, it sounds like you want to say something.
I just wanted to point out that this quotation is from Senator Charles Sumner, who was one of the founders of the Republican Party.
Ah. Yeah, it gives you an idea of how we've flipped on the subject of race.
Yep.
Between Democrats and Republicans. Yeah.
I believe Charles Sumner was also one of the people who fought against diluting the Reconstruction after the Civil War. He was kind of a last holdout for a kind of what I would call a rigorous Reconstruction, which some people argue would have left us in a better place now had it happened. Could it have happened?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the great conflict in the impeachment trial of Andrew Johnson was it was Sumner and his allies versus President Johnson.
So one of the stories that she tells is one that I used in my sermon today about Martin Luther King's pilgrimage to India in 1959. He travels there after the Montgomery bus boycott. He is honored and regaled. He's there to learn about nonviolence and satyagraha, Mahatma Gandhi. And while there, he's visiting a school for Dalit children, and he's greeted as an American untouchable, by which they want to claim him as their own. And he's initially offended and taken aback at being called an untouchable. You remember in India, they've had a caste system that's operated for a few thousand years now, in which people are born into one of four levels of society. But beneath those four is a fifth one, the Dalit, or untouchables, who are considered impure and beneath all the others. Again, a distinction that is artificial and arbitrary, but which has power in the society. Martin Luther King comes to embrace this idea and this title and understand it as a kind of badge of honor. Another bit of history that Wilkerson uncovers that was a surprise to me, frankly, maybe not to all of you, was just how the system of genocide and exclusion of the Jews in Nazi Germany was built upon a very studied understanding of Jim Crow in the United States. As the Nazi Party is coming to power, they actually send people to the United States to study how Jim Crow works. And so this is taken from a parade. You can see all the people lined up in a military type parade, and at the front of the line there is a Nazi flag from 1939. Unbelievably, some of the features of Jim Crow, the Nazis thought were just a little too radical. It wouldn't be possible for them to enact the same kind of brutality, and that was particularly around, lynchings in the early 20th century, up till about 1920, 25 or so. Lynchings would be celebrated events. You would get your candy, bring your children, drive out, big gathering to watch the lynching of some person that was not tried, was not convicted, about, you know, a black person that had done something to offend someone else in the white power structure. And they actually took postcards and took pictures and memorabilia and sent those postcards around. That was an example of something that the Nazis thought they would never be able to get away with. One of the things that also stood out to me was a comment that was made to Wilkerson by a Nigerian-born playwright who was at a lecture that she attended in London. Says, you know, there are no black people in Africa. There are just, you know, people of this nation or that tribe or this place or that place. Being black is something that is defined in America because it's part of our caste system. That we've invented whiteness as a kind of rank of people that deserve higher status. And a lot of the American history is the kind of battle to be included in among white people. One example of that is the fact that we white people like to call themselves Caucasians, and that comes from an anthropologist who was studying skulls collected from different parts of the world, and I believe it was in the 18th century. And he decided that the skulls from people in the Caucasus Mountains were the most beautiful of all. And the Caucasus Mountains are where we've been reading in the news about Nagorno-Karabakh and the Armenians and the Muslims and the conflict. They're just north of Iran and near the Black Sea, south of Russia. Virtually no one in early American history came from the Caucasus, but we liked calling ourselves Caucasian. Somehow that stuck. But this whole debate about who is included in white people and who's excluded came to a special focus in a period where people from Armenia, who actually were ancestors of those people in the Caucasus Mountains, were not included among white people and therefore didn't have the same rights and the same standing in the country. So very briefly, too briefly, we'll just review some of the features of a caste system and how it works in India and in Nazi Germany and in America. She identifies from her own reading and study these 8 pillars, which she define our own system. So the first one is divine will and the laws of nature. The caste system in India is rooted in kind of Hinduism. In the United States, it was rooted primarily in the Old Testament stories of the sons of Noah. You know, nobody's left in the world but the sons of Noah, Shem and Japheth and Ham. And Ham walks into the tent one day and sees his father naked, and that offends Noah. But the other 2 sons, Japheth and what did I just say? They walk in backwards and cover their father, and so as to cover his nakedness. And this in Genesis chapter 20 becomes a sort of table of nations of where people wind up throughout the world. The sons of Ham are condemned, and they are largely thought to be peoples that live south in Africa, people of color. It's one of the places that people look to scripture to undergird their discrimination about people who are inferior. Another feature is heritability. That is that you can't do anything to work your way out of the system. If you're black, you're born black. If you're white, you're white. It's not anything to do with your talents or traits or strengths or your own courage or abilities. It's immutable and inherited from your ancestors. This idea of endogamy, again, this has to do with anti-miscegenation laws, and I may be mispronouncing that as well. But that's the prohibition on intermarriage. The laws to prevent people from different races from getting married persisted well up into the 1960s in America. There's the idea of purity versus pollution, literally that people of the lower castes are dirty and cannot be washed clean, and that even by this physical contact, we would pollute ourselves. In India, it was said that the Dalit, even their shadow can cast, be a source of pollution. One of the stories she tells many stories, and that's a place where we could linger at some point, just to recite some of them, read some of them. But it talks about a championship Little League team that arranged to have a party at the end of the season. And in America, they go to the swimming pool. And the little boy that's a black kid cannot be admitted into the pool. He has to sit outside the fence of the swimming pool. It's kind of a chain link fence. You can see what's going on. They pass him food through the fence. And finally, the coach prevails on the administrator of the swimming pool to let the kid come in. He's part of the team, but they put him on a raft, and a lifeguard walks him around the perimeter of the pool one time, all the while insisting, don't touch the water, don't touch the water. And then he's escorted out again and made to sit outside the fence. The little kid, refuses to get a ride home, and is never quite the same after that. Occupational hierarchy might be sort of obvious, that just the sense of that there are certain jobs that people do assigned to their place in the caste system. And then this all gets reinforced by terrible dehumanization and stigma, terror as enforcement. That's what lynching is all about. And all the while, there's this sense that some people are just superior and others are inferior. We're going to be able to talk about all of this at just a moment. But I thought this was kind of instructive. We just had an insurrection in the US Capitol, mostly all white people, symptomatic of white supremacy, white power operating in our country. But the day after, it was largely a crew of black workers in the Capitol cleaning up. And this is actually a photograph that was taken on January 7th, the next day, in the US Capitol. So, I mean, this is kind of a jumping off point, is Wilkerson argues that caste is a way for us to understand the origins of our discontents. This plague of white supremacy, this big lie, is something that we haven't really dealt with, that we haven't confronted it, and that we need to begin to do so if we hope to get past this kind of the plague of racism in America. So I've got some stories and things I could read, but let's just pause here. And I'm just curious what is going through your mind, questions, or some of you have read the book, you might have other thoughts to share. I'm curious what you have to say.
Well, I have to say this is a difficult book for me to read, because every couple pages I had to put it down and think about things that had happened in my life, and never being the object of the discrimination, but always encountering people who had been, and literally, I suppose, hundreds of such events. But I think back to one when I was one of the youth workers at Immanuel, and a very bright young man by the name of Kevin came up to me. He was doing his homework, and he said, Richard, I have a question for you. Can you tell me if this is true? Because someone told me that at one time black people had to ride in the back of the bus. And I said, yes, Kevin, sadly, that's true. And I think I've spent the rest of my life trying to answer that the next question he asked. His question was, why? And I babbled something about stupidity and I don't know, evil, I guess. But I've never really come across a good way to answer that question, why?
Well, I mean, I guess following Wilkerson's train of thought, why is that there's a whole big land of opportunity lying at your feet. You've just taken a boat across the ocean, and you got dollar signs in your eyes, and we also have this colonial sense of superiority. We've got the better guns, and we've got the better technology, and we've got the literature, and just don't have any respect for the people we encounter. And this is a way to explain to ourselves why it's okay to just take over the land and to use it as we want and to push the people aside, and then, oh yeah, bring in some other people to do the physical labor. And it's extremely lucrative. We built the nation this way. And lots of the infrastructure, lots of Washington, D.C. and the railroads. with the Chinese. So, I mean, it was very self-serving.
I think another thing is that it comes from the very start. The first black slaves were brought over. That's well before.
Ken, you're breaking up on us.
I'm breaking up again. Okay. I was just saying that the first black slaves were brought over very early, in 1919. Ones in Virginia. And so it's been there since the very start. There was an advantage to the white dominant race and just kept it up. Do you hear any of that?
I think I could piece together enough of it to know what that slaves came very early, that it was part of cementing white power.
May I come in here?
Yes, Marianne.
I grew up on a farm in Wisconsin, and we didn't have TV and all this stuff, so I didn't know what was going on in the world. I went to Washington, D.C. when I was 17, and I didn't encounter any racism really in Washington, but one day I got on a bus in Virginia, and the bus driver, I didn't realize he was talking to me. He said, "Get to the front of the bus." And I continued to the back. He said, "I'm talking to you." And I realized he was asking me. And I said, okay, I didn't know why. I had no idea that I was supposed to be in the front and the bus was supposed to be in the back. And I still didn't know when I got off. And I asked some of the people about it, and they told me why. There was a lot of ignorance about that in the North.
So what are some ways that this has persisted up until 2020? Do you think it is part of our, I mean, this is almost a rhetorical question.
Me?
Sure, or?
I worked with a Black woman. We became very good friends, and I was hoping she would come to see me, but we had this lockdown. She had a stroke.
So, Marcia, you just finished the book before we came together.
Yeah, I have I like the ending best because it explained to me a very good theory for why Trump is so popular. And basically, she talks about how the lowest caste being the Blacks and then other people of color and then poor whites. And as poor whites see that the caste lower than them is gaining, like when people support immigrants or the rights of people of color, then it might be unconscious, but their own security is knowing that they still have something over all the people below them. They see that crumbling, and that they no longer have that assurance, and so their whole worldview is in doubt, and that, rather than actively hating Black people, is what motivates them to support someone like Trump, who wants to go back to the way things were. I'm not explaining it very well, but I wanted to be brief, but to me this makes a lot of sense, and so now I finally have an understanding for at least why a portion of Trump's supporters support him.
Well, it wasn't until 1965, 64, 65, the Voting Rights Act, and where people of color could become full US citizens by immigration. And then that was set aside at the end of the Voting Rights Act just a few years ago to ensure that people all have access to vote, to the right to vote, and to become a U.S. citizen, a full citizen.
Well, also she points out that even though it had been going on much longer than 2008, it was like the last straw kind of thing when Obama was elected, because if someone from the lowest caste could be in the White House, then all white people are at risk. Plus that demographic prediction that in 2042, whites will be a minority. So those things together put existential fear into the hearts of many white people, according to Isabel.
Yeah. I think if anyone has any question of what in the world has been happening to this country politically in the last 5 years, one way to understand it is to read this book. I think it makes more sense than almost anything else I have seen by commentators.
Right.
Isabel Wilkerson in another place makes the point that the year 2111, I think it was, 2111, 90 years from now, we will finally reach the point in our history when Black people, people of color, will have been free, that is from 1865, as long as they have been enslaved. So this gives you an idea of just how deep the history of enslavement goes. And then if you add on top of that Jim Crow, which gets finally becomes unraveled in the civil rights era, and then you could say has been replaced with mass incarceration. So we haven't yet been fully free of the vestiges of slavery, and of this caste system is sort of ingenious at persisting.
Maybe the American Indian has also been subject to racism. When you think about one of the presidents, was it Jackson?
Yeah.
Had the Trail of Tears, the Cherokee Indians from North Carolina and South Carolina had to march to Oklahoma, and so many of them died, and it was just very, very unfair. But that's racism too. He broke the pact that he thought.
Yeah. Well, beyond that, it's a part of the caste system. I mean, I think Wilkerson wants to argue that we can better understand what's happening with racism when we learn the dynamics of caste system. Those 8 pillars I was talking about very quickly.
The 8 pillars, I have a visual that is in my mind next to them of the game Chutes and Ladders, where I grew up learning about social mobility in this country and how anybody can be anything. And there is a set of ladders that are wider or narrower next to those 7 levels. One of the issues in one of my jobs was in terms of making policy for health, that when we want to involve minority folks in making policy, we take them to Harvard or Princeton and elevate them up the ladder, which takes them out of their community, and they become part of a kind of an overclass, like a Mandarin class of educated folks. And it gives the illusion of racial openness, but to some extent, there's a rigidity hidden beneath.
Yeah. Well, so with the idea of caste, there are the chutes and ladders. That's an interesting kind of metaphor. But then there are some of us are born into higher levels in the American home, and so we have our own chutes and ladders to go up or down, but some people can never reach the level that we start out with. They're in the basement or something, and they can advance or fall, but they can't ever advance beyond where we start as white, particularly as white men in this country.
Yeah, I mean, that's very well said. I mean, I think having, you know, being from a fairly impoverished family or you know, part of the white poor, I've always had the advantage that, you know, that I could disappear into my whiteness, you know, and then be seen like any other white person. I think, you know, a lot of times we misunderstand what we mean by the word, you know, privilege, but I think there really is something to that term privilege. Somebody who's white will always be seen as an individual. You know, they can always escape their story in a way that minorities cannot. Minorities will always be viewed until we change, until we do a lot of hard work and ask ourselves those hard questions. You know, we'll always be seen by this weird artificial construct. You know, and so it's I don't know, it's just sad. How do we get rid of a construct or something that's so artificial when so many of us have been able to benefit from the fact that we can just, you know, hide behind the fact that we're white. You know, we don't have to appear to be from a lower socioeconomic ladder.
So I think Wilkerson partly answers that by saying one first is awareness. But then she does spend time in the last part of the book, just kind of going through all the ways that we hurt ourselves with this caste system. You know, when certain people who are born with native abilities and talents and intellect can't use those gifts in society, we all suffer. When people assume roles that they're not really qualified for, or they just, you know, we suffer. When our friend group is limited, when the marriage pool is limited, again, we suffer. So, you know, what would bring about an end to whiteness? One is some awareness and accountability. And I don't think she says a lot about what that accountability looks like. Other people I know talk about reparations. But yeah, what would it take for us to be accountable as citizens of this country, but also as members of this church? And how has our church participated in this system? I'm asking too many questions, so.
One specific thing she does talk about is some kind of truth and reconciliation process, like in South Africa, that might go a long way if it could ever actually happen. And I like that idea. I think reparations are appropriate, but I don't know if it'll ever happen. But who knows?
Certainly reparations politically very, very. Hear any of that? No. Okay. Next time I'll show up with a better computer. or a different computer, I guess.
Yeah.
You can always type a chat.
Yeah, you could type your questions in the chat and then we'll repeat them.
Or your comment, yeah.
One thing about truth and reparations is, I think to make it successful in South Africa, to some extent, they decoupled it from accountability. So the commissions were set up to get people to tell their stories, no matter what the consequences, with a promise that the consequences would be limited in some way, shape, or form, in order to make that happen. That's quite a deal that a lot of people might not want to make that deal.
Yeah. Well, and you have to have somebody like a Desmond Tutu or a Nelson Mandela, who's sort of trusted leaders at the center of it, who are enlightened. And that's not easy to replicate either. Oh, Richard, okay.
Well, I was, when I got to the section where she talks about terrorism and everyday terrorism, please tell me to shut up if I'm taking too much time and telling personal stories, but I do have one that I want to tell. When I was in graduate school at the University of Chicago, I really only made one good friend. He would often, when I lived in what you call the Newtown area, at Belmont and Pine Grove, Chuck would come up and visit from time to time. He lived in Chatham, and we'd sit around and talk, and he loved my store of magazines that I had laying out on the coffee table. And one day Chuck came up, and this is 1970s we're talking about now. One day he came up and he was obviously very upset and shaken, and talked with him. Chuck had an Audi that had a tendency to do horrible things on occasion, like die in the middle of a street. And it was a common phrase among black people on the south side of Chicago that you did not go north of North Avenue unless you had somebody to protect you. And I was living north of North Avenue. And Chuck said as he was driving up, he was just wondering what happens if this car breaks down in a white neighborhood. What could happen to me? And I must say I've never forgotten that.
Did anyone come out to help him?
What's that?
Did anyone come out to help him?
Well, it never happened. The Audi didn't die in the middle of a white neighborhood, but it was the fear there. What might happen if I were placed in this situation?
Speaking of the Green Book, in this case, the idea that it was so dangerous for African Americans to travel through much of this country. I mean, this great expansive country, 3,000 miles across, that so many of us have probably been able to just get on the road and enjoy all these diners and great little places and everything. And yet, Black Americans had to have a travel guide that was, basically like navigating the country like a checkerboard.
So I see Ken has typed into the chat box. The question is how to remove the caste system. We need to think about specific action we can take as either a church or a society to reduce the effects of caste. Is this something that is worth another forum session?
I think that's an enormous $64,000 question, Ken. but I tempted to think maybe the only way is to follow China and have re-education camps. That's a joke. I don't know what else can be done. It's going to take generations. I mean, supposedly we've been working on it already, but we've got to get more people to agree that it's got to change. And there's lots of people who don't think so. That's my 2 cents.
Well, you know, I think there is an opportunity to carry the ball a little further in our own time in these next few years, whether it be support of investment in the south and west sides of Chicago, or in criminal justice reform, or there are communities that are trying to redirect dollars from the sale of marijuana. Evanston's one of them. Chicago and Illinois is trying to use those dollars in progressive ways for those communities. Chase Bank is being held to account a little bit by some reporting from WBEZ about their lending practices and mortgages. And, you know, then police accountability, which is very much on the minds of people, growing awareness of what it is to encounter a police officer as a white person compared to a black person. I have every confidence that there will be backlash and that the problem will not be fully and finally solved, but certainly I think the opportunity is sort of teed up for us to try to take some steps forward as a society.
Yeah, I have a question for Ken, and he might have to answer by chat, but this is kind of in the same thing. I know the forum planning group was supposed to meet on Thursday, and did you come to any decision on whether it is possible to schedule a police accountability speaker from One North Side?
I think bad about
it. Yes, we did, and we can, yeah, on March 21st.
Oh, great. Yeah. Have you contacted Oswaldo Gomez? He's the person who volunteered to speak.
Yes.
You have contacted. All
no,
right.
I haven't contacted him yet, but I'm planning to do that, and I will copy you on that. Thank you for helping us.
Okay, so you're going to send out an email to Oswaldo then?
Yeah.
Great. Great. Okay. One tiny little drop in the bucket.
The comment from Brian Ibsen. You can all see the chat, or not? Removing caste is the task of generations. Ameliorating it is an idea we have tried for a couple of generations by wider ladders and narrower chutes. But patience is hard in periods where mobility is constrained.
I think one of the points that Wilkerson makes very well is that this is all based upon a lie, a big lie. And I think everything we can do to try to combat that lie, no matter who we are dealing with, whether we're dealing with people in the power structure or just neighbors or people who are anywhere in this, caught in this lie. Because what we know about lies, and we especially, I think, learned this from the Nazis, is that if you repeat something enough times, people will believe it. And if you hear something 3 times a day from Fox News, eventually you're going to believe it.
Yes.
Well.
Other comments? Would you like to hear a story? We were right at 4 o'clock. I don't know. Were we planning to go to 4:30 or just for the hour?
Sort of depends.
Bye, everyone.
Marcia's got to go.
Oh.
Hi, Marcia.
Okay.
Yeah, we lost Libby as well.
Okay.
Maybe somebody else. Sure.
I personally would like to see the conversation continue. We've talked about the possibility of continuing next Sunday.
Right. That's why I was just going to bring up is whether we should just go ahead. If we think there's enough people that would be interested, we could have a continued conversation next Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
Should we go a little bit more in depth with those 8 pillars?
Yeah, I would think.
Yeah, I think there are some things that can be said about Wilkerson's book, which are maybe not attacking the book, but there are perhaps some corrective things that can be said about some parts of it. And I know we didn't even get to that today.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Brian has just voted yes on next Sunday, and I will also, I think.
Okay.
And Donna does, so that's you.
I'm
and maybe we can pick up a couple more additional people.
Okay. Okay.
I'm good on Sunday, so.
I hope to be here. I hope.
Yeah, we hope so too, Mary.
We hope so. Okay, well, I'll say the same thing, Mary. I hope I'm here next week too, but if I'm here, I'll be here. So we can all say that, Mary Ann.
Yes, we certainly can.
Yeah, there is, if the Super Bowl were on and Green Bay Packers are playing at that time, then I don't know.
Okay.
Oh.
Oh. I do know. No.
All right.
Okay, so we'll send out an email with the contact and everything again.